Привет, ребята! Сегодня мы сделаем обзор на самый большой, полный пиздец, MiG-23M. Well, alright, let's do this. This is the review of the MiG-23M. And I'm gonna be honest with you and kind of spoil the review. This is probably one of the worst planes I've ever touched, especially for a review. Well, for a review, it's definitely the worst. So there goes that. You can also use this review for MiG-23MFs because the M and the MFs that are found in the German and the Italian tree are exactly the same as this aircraft. So let's get into it because this is going to be a little bit of a short one. So first of all, let's start with the missiles. You can carry up to 6 missiles, and it will either be 6 IR or 4 IR and 2 radar missiles if you choose to do so. When it comes to the IR missiles, the best missiles that you have access to here are either the R60Ms or the R23Ts. Now, R60Ms, you can go for all 6 of them. They are pretty okay, honestly, because they are all aspects missiles. However, they haven't got a lot of range, so probably best use case is to use them within around 2.5 kilometers of your target. The R23Ts, now these are also IR missiles, however they are much bigger and you can only carry up to 2 of them. These missiles unfortunately have a very low G-pull amount, so they only pull around 20 Gs, so they are basically dodged very easily, even by random maneuvers by enemies. However, they have an absolutely huge payload, which equals to around 20 kilograms of TNT. So they don't really have to be right on the target to explode to do tremendous damage. So that's the plus side. Your alternative is to, instead of the Ts, go with the R23Rs. Now, these are radar missiles. They also handle, in terms of the aerodynamics, I suppose, just as the Ts do. So they are rather cumbersome. They don't really turn very well. They don't really track very well, but they are your only radar option. The key thing I would like to point out here is that you can either go with the Rs or the Ts. You cannot mix it up where you go maybe one T and one R. You have to choose between them, right? So I would either recommend going with 4 R60Ms and 2 R23Ts, or 5 R60Ms and 1 R23T. This missile can be considered to be pretty useless, but there are a few exceptions why I still think you should use them. Talking about the gun, this has a 23mm gun with 200 rounds of ammo. It's decent, does the job well. If you hit someone with it, they're going to go down pretty quickly. Now, let's go into the first huge downside, which is the flare and chaff count. This plane can carry a pathetic 12, that's 1-2, flares or chaff. It's a pathetic count. You have to be very careful how you use your countermeasures. Talking about the airframe, it looks like a MiG-23ML or a MiG-23MLD or MLA, but it is actually worse than all of those planes in basically every regard. You can compare the stats on something like statshark in terms of the engine performance, acceleration, turn rate. It is basically worse than all of those planes in every single regard. So if you really want to feel like and find out what it feels like to fly an even more gimped MiG-23 MLD, well, you can play this thing, but it handles absolutely terribly. On the plus side, yes, it is pretty quick in a straight line, especially at altitude, but honestly, it is slower than an ML or an MLD, so it's not quite as much of a rocket ship, although it's not too far off. This plane does suffer from excessive energy bleeds in turns, and it does take a while for it to ramp back up, so also maybe another small thing to keep in mind, which is quite common with the 23s in general. Talking about the avionics, they are also terrible. So first of all, let's start with the RWR. It's a very analog style with 4 different sectors, essentially. So it's not really going to tell you much about what's trying to lock you. It will just tell you that something is. Not amazing, but there it goes. And then In terms of the radar itself, it's also pretty bad because you cannot really toggle it out of the search mode manually. You can go into the MTI mode, kind of how you would on something like a MiG-23ML or MLD, where basically if you're below 1500 meters and looking below the horizon, it will go into MTI mode. And MTI mode is essentially like a knockoff pulse Doppler, right? So it filters out the ground. So that's quite good. However, the big downside here is that this radar has no ACM mode. So when you do see an enemy in front of you and you actually want to lock them, well, you better hope that you can find the target on your radar, select the right target, lock it, and then hopefully launch your missile. So you kind of always have to give yourself a little bit more time when trying to use the radar because of that fact, and also the fact that the radar itself doesn't refresh very quickly. So it's kind of a big downside. Now, how do you actually make this thing work? Well, it's pretty difficult, and I would definitely recommend not playing it up high. There are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, you might be tempted to, play it at altitude and really use its speed, but you haven't got the radar missiles to really be able to compete with enemies that are up high, because like a MiG-23ML or MLD or a Phantom, will just be able to outjoust you very easily. And second of all, you haven't got the countermeasures either. So if you get, a couple of like J7Ds on you, you will be pretty much out of countermeasures within the first, couple of engagements if you use them quite liberally. Instead, I would actually say you should play it low. Now, whether you want to hug the ground or not, that's up to you, but I would definitely play it somewhere where you can at least try to use the MTI mode if you are using radar missiles. If you're completely abandoning the radar missiles, which is, to be honest, not the worst idea in the world, I would say just play it like a MiG-21 SMT, except ground hug all the time. Yes, you don't have the ability to pull massive AOA on demand like you can with the 21, but this was probably going to be your best chance at getting kills. So try to go around the side of the map, pick targets off that are engaged. If you get into a 1vx scenario, you're going to struggle, and overall, it's quite a limiting playstyle, really, unfortunately. Now, as a small tip, I would personally recommend carrying at least one radar missile. Yes, the radar missiles are terrible because the R-24Rs that are found on the 23ML and MLD are absolutely amazing and excellent missiles, but these are nothing like it. So it pulls really poorly, it's able to be dodged very easily by aircraft. However, in cases where you are actually sitting behind the fast target, like, for example, a starfighter, and you're not able to catch them, you will be able to catch them with this missile. And even in rear aspect, if they, let's say, chaff or try to multipath, because of how huge the TNT equivalent of the payload of this missile is, being 20 kilos or so, you don't have to hit directly on the target to actually kill it. And while your R60Ms will be easily flared by this type of target that's getting away from you, you will be able to convert some of those kills, at least with the R23Rs. So they're not totally useless, but it's just like a very small use case. From head-ons, you're not really going to be able to compete much. Now, I wanted to share also my stats with this aircraft. So it took me 49 games to spade it completely, although it was finished with the more important modes around game 20-something, because the last two rows are basically anti-ground ordnance that are useless in RRB. But in the 49 games, I had a 59% win rate with 2.0 kill-death ratio and 1.1 kill per spawn ratio. I'm going to be honest with you, I was actually aiming just for 1.0 kill to spawn or 1.0 kill to death ratio. I was that desperate just to have something like that for this plane because it is that difficult to fly. And this is kind of reflected in statshark figures. So if we look at the MiG-23M statshark figures, it has a 51.1% win rate, 0.96 kills per death, and 0.77 kills per spawn. The MiG-23MF, the market version of this plane, has even worse stats. So it has 44.9% win rate, 0.78 kills per death, and 0.64 kills per spawn. And then the Italian MiG-23MF, which is found in the Italian tree, has 48% win rate, 0.92 kills per def, and 0.75 kills per spawn. So I was able to exceed all of those, and those are also lifetime figures for these aircraft, but it really wasn't easy. And I was genuinely trying to, do well in this aircraft, but yeah, it wasn't easy. When it comes to the overall verdict of the MiG-23M, I just have to start off by saying this. This grind was one of the most frustrating ones I have done ever, and definitely one of the most frustrating ones I've done for a review. I wanted to give up at around game 4. That's how bad the start of it was, and it never got any better, honestly. There are just too many factors with this aircraft that aren't good, and could potentially even tank the performance if just one of them exists on a better aircraft, but somehow they all appear at the same time for this one frame. So really here what I'm talking about is you have basically no flares or chaff. You have just 12, which is a ridiculous volume for 11.0. You have a terrible flight model that bleeds a ton of speed and also doesn't really retain speed that quickly. Yes, you are kind of fast, but that's really your one gimmick. And you also have an awful radar with terrible radar missiles or terrible IR missiles if you use the R-23Ts, which I think you shouldn't use just because they can just be randomly one-flared by somebody. So it's got a bad load of missiles, bad avionics, bad flight model, bad defensive capabilities. It's just unfun all the way around. So overall, to give my rating of this thing, in terms of the fun factor, I would give it a 1. Purely 1 out of 10. I cannot give it any higher. I just wanted to give up the whole review process at about game 3 or 4. I actually stopped reviewing this and finished reviewing and playing more with the J8F because I was having a lot of fun with it, instead of touching this crap. It was just an awful experience. So in terms of the kind of frustrations that I've had, so far with the different planes I reviewed, this is second to none. It's been the most frustrating jet, quite frankly. I felt useless most of the time. I felt like I was fighting against my plane and the radar 24/7. I never kind of got into like the flow of combat that you would with other aircraft. Now, in terms of effectiveness, I'd probably give it a 2 out of 10, maybe 1.5. I don't know. It's not completely useless because the R60Ms can do something in down tiers. But really the only way I could imagine this thing actually being worse than it is it's just if it was a subsonic aircraft. To put things into perspective, I had I think 20 something K RP left to unlock the MiG-29 when I finished spading this aircraft, and I just couldn't bring myself to even play like 3 more games with this thing just to get the MiG-29. I said, screw it, I'm going to play the 21 SMT because it's more fun, and I finished the grind in literally less than 2 games to get it. So I don't recommend you play it. I recommend you never actually buy the MF in the German tree. That's a huge waste of money, so please do not buy it. I also recommend you entirely skip the MF in the Italian tree because it is just as bad. So overall, that kind of brings the conclusion to my thoughts on this aircraft. It's a hard skip, it's trash tier, it's definitely never touch, and hopefully the next plane that I'm reviewing is going to be a little bit more fun because I'm not gonna lie, after playing this plane, I basically stepped away from Warthunder for like 2 or 3 days now, and I just didn't want to play it because how bad this plane was. So yeah, if you do want to subject yourself to a real terrible experience, go ahead, be my guest. But I hope to see you on the next video where we're gonna have hopefully a little bit more fun. Let's see. And if you have any ideas on maybe what I could review, let me know down in the comments. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.